Dallas area in Texas. I work for a company named Small Consulting, where we do a lot of application development, website development, all that kind of stuff. And I'm part of our user experience practice there, where I lead a team of kind of design implementers. So we do some of the design, but then we do a lot of front-end development, that type of stuff. Quick plug for my talk. You guys probably heard these all day. My hashtag is zombie. Whenever you go to text this, there's a phone number. I guess they have the words that go into. So I'll put that at the end. If you guys talk, definitely appreciate any votes. So with that, I'd love to ask a few questions. Okay. Do I need the microphone? Can you guys hear me in the back? Or?
Mic would be nice, I think.
Yeah.
No. So, two quick questions for the group. Who here has a pattern library that they're working on a project today or whatever it is? Wow. All right, cool. That's blown me away. I mean, just the conversations that I've been having here, like, this place is awesome. This is my first year at the conference. It's awesome. I love how advanced everybody is. Now, let me ask the real question. Is your pattern library up to date when you compare it to your application or website? Raise your hand if it is. All right, so I saw a lot of hands go down, right? That's probably why you guys are here. Zombie pattern libraries, right? That's everybody that kind of raised their hand saying, hey, I've got one, but it's not really up to date with my website. It's kind of what we're going to refer to as zombie pattern libraries today. It's kind of alive, because of how, maybe your application took some inspiration from it, like it kind of lives out there. It started well-intentioned, but it's kind of died off over time, right? And we had the same problem with Small, right? We're a consulting firm. We have a unique set of challenges that we don't just have to do it once for our products, right? We're trying to do this regularly for different clients, whether we're delivering our design deliverables like that, or if it's just a regular part of our app dev process, right? We have different people, different skill sets, different tech stacks, right? So we need something that scales across all of those. And there was this great quote. Anybody here a fan of The Walking Dead? Great season 6, really enjoying it so far. There's this great quote on there. How do you keep living knowing that's the way the world works, right? Asking about the zombie apocalypse. Well, I would say writing CSS isn't life or death for us, so I'm gonna amend that quote. How do you keep building interfaces knowing that's what the world is like, right? That's why we're all here. We're trying to find better ways to build interfaces. And we could have just let this problem go, especially in a consulting firm. Most of our clients are like, why are you even doing this? This is like wasting time, it's wasting budget. But we decided to find a better way. We decided to find a way that we could scale this across projects and really apply it over and over. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Kind of what have we learned in the consulting context that hopefully you guys can go and take back to maybe kill those zombie pattern libraries and keep them alive. And here's what's funny. So very little of this is actually going to be about the technical implementation. A lot of this is going to be about process, governance, how do we keep these alive. And as I talk to people here, I'm picking up this theme that a lot of people think it's a tech problem. And it really starts with rethinking the design process, right? I've talked to people who said, hey, I keep trying to do this, and on Friday we get agreement from the design team, and I walk in on Monday, and like the designs totally got pulled out from under me, and we're having to restart the designs and everything. And changing the culture around pattern libraries really starts with rethinking the design process at the beginning and what is the role of design, right? So, like I said, I'm more on the design side, and I happen to write HTML and CSS. I'm not a pure developer, right? A lot of this work actually came pairing up with one of the people on our app dev side. So the first quote that I love is, this has been spoken a lot. It was originally presented by Andy Clark. It's this idea of building systems and not pages, right? I was raised in a design world where you went and did all these beautiful static Photoshop pops, presented them to the client. I was like, yeah, this is awesome, it's beautiful, and then you kind of like toss them over to developers and like, cool, go build it. And that works if you're working on greenfield projects, right? You may still have to do that because you have to set the initial styles of your project or application. But if you've got a mature application, or you have something that's already out there, you really have to think more about building a design system, right? Extracting the useful bits from those designs that are reusable, and thinking about, how am I going to use that, and how am I going to scale it across one or multiple applications. It's more work for designers, but It's kind of blurred out here. This was an email that I got from a developer that walked under a project where we've done a pattern library. And he literally says, I'm crying over here, loving it. This coupled with the user stories makes the process much easier, right? This guy was not a UI developer. He was like a back-end .NET developer. He was just like, oh, I love this. This makes my life so much easier, right? And this is our first sales point to clients, right? We're telling them, hey, this is actually speeding up your development process. It's not something that you're just spending money on as extra documentation. Both Dave Rupert, who I think is giving the keynote tomorrow, and Mark Otto, who created Bootstrap, have given talks where they talk about this concept of building a tiny Bootstrap for their client, right? So sometimes when we're just doing the design phase, maybe we're not doing the implementation, we'll deliver the pattern libraries, the documentation, but it's more of that design system so our teams can go be successful. And here's kind of what that looks like, right? We don't get rid of this idea of static Photoshop comps or sketch comps or whatever you're doing. You can still go through that process, and it's valuable, especially on a brand new project. You have to set that kind of design direction. And I personally find that it's easier to kind of iterate on designs in Photoshop. But then you actually have to slice those up. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. But you slice them into the reusable bits. And then finally, you can reassemble those into kind of new pages. And here's what that really looks like. This project that I'm about to show you, it was actually a very mature design system, and we would actually go from whiteboard to HTML prototype to real code. So here was these were some of the original comps. And I know it's hard to see, I apologize. The projector isn't great, but we'll pop up. These were some of the original comps that came out. And so we looked at kind of extracting those reusable bits or the components. Those of you that work with pattern libraries are probably familiar with that, right? One of those useful bits was kind of this timeline. You can start to see that they're mostly the same and repeatable. Same thing with table styles. They're all used across different contexts, but it's mostly the same idea. Again, hard to tell on the projector, so I apologize. And then finally, we had kind of these dashboard widgets that all had different content, but again, that same pattern. And so, again, our designers were focused on extracting those reusable bits and kind of keeping them consistent. And what's great is, how many of you guys here would call yourself a designer, like maybe work in Photoshop, Sketch, kind of stuff? Okay, about half the room. What's great is a lot of people may or may not know that some of the design tools today, if you're purely working in Photoshop and Sketch, are actually starting to support many of these workflows. And if you're on the development side, take this back and educate your design teams, right? Let them know that these tools are out there to use that. First one is Sketch. I think everybody loves Sketch. I've started to tread in there. But the big thing that people should know is this idea of symbols. They're kind of these reusable stamps that you can use across. And what's great is, again, this just pushes designers to start thinking in terms of patterns, right? Because that's how developers think. I'm actually a big fan of Photoshop, and a lot of people don't know because they're abandoning Photoshop for Sketch, but Photoshop has done some great work with pattern libraries. And if you've never looked, if you're a Photoshop user, you can actually go into this window menu and open up this libraries panel. And when you do that, you actually get this panel that lets you pull in colors, font styles, graphics, which are really just individual layers or layer groups. But what's great about this, they've actually made it more powerful where now teams can come together and collaborate on this. So you can give multiple people write access to your pattern library and kind of keep it up to date and consistent. And even better, again, if you've got kind of that handoff where you've got designers and they're handing off to developers, this will actually spit out a website on Creative Cloud that you can give to your developer with all the different patterns out there. But again, we're big advocates in terms of moving away from this kind of designers working Photoshop and Sketch and then they hand off files to developers. But at the same time, we're realistic in the fact that even in our design team, maybe half the people don't write HTML and CSS. Right? So these tools enable us to put them on projects and kind of think about patterns. But really, the tools don't fix the problem, right? It's a process problem. That's where does the design process break down? We kind of see it looking like this on projects where designers are kind of working off in the corner, doing some discovery and design, they kind of iterate through that. And then as they're finishing, they kind of hand it over to developers in terms of their agile development cycle. First time developers see these designs oftentimes is in the design grooming, or in the grooming sessions where they're actually sizing and stuff. They're not getting pulled in earlier. And so having this wall or silo where, even though we're still from the same company and same teams, we're still working in separate work streams, just doesn't work, right? That traditional handoff is broken. So So we're going to talk about how to solve that, right? How do we move to a model where it's kind of this unified process that we can kind of work through? And for us, at the center of that are the pattern libraries, right? The pattern library is that artifact that translates design into real-life development, into reality of what you're going to get. And so what's great is when we look at that designing with patterns process that I talked about, the pattern library, again, is that centerpiece of documentation right there in the middle, right? It's an extra step for the designers, but it only accelerates that development cycle. And so remembering those designs from earlier where I was pulling out the useful bits, here's kind of where we ended up on that project, right? We had a mature design system, we went and built a pattern library, and we would actually start with sketches like this for that project. Again, not my sketches, one of the guys on my team who, amazing sketch guy, my sketches are much uglier than that. But basically, he would come in and just draw kind of these boxes. And a sketch like that might look like a page, might look like this in terms of a page. And so what was great was when you compare it, we could sketch on the whiteboard or a piece of paper, something like this, and then in terms of where he writes visitor approval, we have a visitor approval component that's over on the left. And so I don't have to waste that time. I don't, as a designer, I don't have to tell the developer what is it going to look like, what are the buttons, what are all that. It's just a reusable component that's already in the pattern library. Same thing in the middle. We've got a design, or we've got a detail panel and a status panel, and the developers just know, hey, the details in terms of this pattern get implemented like this. It just becomes this process where the teams are working closely enough and in sync, where the designer can just say, hey, it's a details box, go use this pattern, right? And what's great about this, again, the goal isn't to eliminate Photoshop or Sketch from our workflow, because those tools have value in terms of creating user interfaces. It's about eliminating waste, right? That's the whole idea behind lean UX and moving faster. We can skip like Acture and balsamic wireframes. We can skip Photoshop comps with a mature design system and just get straight to code as fast as we can. And what that means is that the role of the designer on a project starts to evolve over time, right? They get less focused on kind of these beautiful dribble designs that they can go and post and get a ton of likes, and they can really focus on the real UX problems, right? User flows, talking to users, thinking through different options, iterating on different ideas. And the pattern library actually enables them to iterate faster, right? So I'm telling this to the developers in the room because take these ideas back to your design teams and hopefully they will enjoy getting to work on this versus just being Photoshop junkies all day where they're just moving stuff around. So as you move through that, a question to ask is, all right, we want to build a pattern library. Where does that pattern library live in our design process, right? There's a lot of different options. There's another article that I think it was Chris Porter wrote on CSS Tricks about like different models, but we've kind of put together this maturity model just based on what we've seen with different clients in terms of their style guide and how integrated it is with their design and development workflow. So it starts off kind of at the bottom where it's just inconsistent, right? Different apps are styled completely inconsistently. I've got a client right now that we're working with who over 10 years, have built 40 different applications. Every application at the end was like, hey, copy the CSS, start a new project, and we'll start building this one, right? So if you look at two apps side by side, they kind of look the same. If you look at like number 1, number 40, they look completely different because it's just evolved over time. They never got back and updated those, right? So this is just completely inconsistent. A pretty common one that I actually see is kind of the one-time style guide. And a lot of times what this is the company goes out, they hire a branding or ad agency, they put together some logos, some design comps, some ideas, kind of get a PDF at the end, and it's like, cool, here you go, like here are your brand guidelines, and then it's like dead on arrival, right? It's already separate from your app dev workflow. I'm guessing that a lot of you that raised your hand at the beginning and said, hey, I've got a pattern library that's up to date, are probably about here in your maturity model, where you've got a manual pattern library, right? You built it, but then you have to remember to go back and update it. That's definitely challenging. It's like it's well-intentioned, but when you're busy and timelines are getting rushed, you end up not going back and making the updates. Going up from there, ideally, and this is where we really shoot for with all our clients, is to get into kind of an automated pattern library, right? Where it's part of your build process. Anything that I change in the app gets automatically updated in the pattern library and vice versa. And then finally, we tell people you don't always have to go here, but actually moving to kind of a team model or something like that, where For example, I think the keynote speaker tomorrow is Gina Bolton from Salesforce. They're pretty well known. They've done a lot of speaking and writing about. They have a whole design team internally that manages all this stuff. So this is just kind of a maturity model, and we talk to clients about this to say like, hey, where do you think you are today, and what makes sense for your organization? But thinking about this, there was a great quote by Phil Hawksworth, who did a talk, and I love this quote. It basically says, unless it's a part of your build, your style guide is just more documentation to maintain, right? And that really resonated with me because, again, we're not here to build more documentation. Whether we're on the development side, we're trying to be agile, or on the UX side, we're trying to be lean, right? We're trying to get rid of that waste. We want to keep the pattern library valuable. And this is kind of the holy grail that we're all shooting for. I've heard a lot of people call it that. So who doesn't want to go find the holy grail, right, of pattern libraries or style guides? So let's go ahead and get started. So how many of you would like to start a pattern library? Like, how many of you gotten started? Is that all right? Cool. I see some hands going up. These next couple of slides should be good because the reality is we walk into a lot of projects where it's not greenfield, we're not designing it from scratch. We're actually taking an existing application and kind of retrofitting the pattern library into it to get it to work. So this is kind of the process that we'll go through on projects with clients. It all starts with taking an inventory of the patterns that are out there. Whether you've got one application or you've got 40, like that client that I talked to, you have to understand what it is that you're going to be documenting. So here's an example of a component inventory that we put together. It's a PowerPoint document in this case, but we've done work with clients where we'll just print out screenshots of every single page and one or more applications, put them up on a whiteboard, and just bring people who understand this together and just highlight stuff, draw on them, talk about what's in there. And in there, in something like this, you're basically trying to look at what are those meaningful components that get reused across the application. So in this case, we were capturing kind of the desktop and the mobile version. The client was really thinking about two separate designs there. We captured kind of an inventory of where we see these components in the application, which came in handy later when we were kind of refactoring code. And we even gave it a meaningful name. So here's what you should really be looking for during this part of the process. Here's what you should be looking to document. Right? The biggest thing is that you're looking for what are the standard base styles that we're looking for, right? What are the color palettes? What are the fonts, icons? Kind of the stuff that doesn't even roll up to a component, but it's the stuff that builds up your interface from scratch. If you subscribe to kind of atomic design, you're kind of documenting the atoms in your interface. From there, you kind of look at those components. This is probably the easiest part to go through and document. I mean, it's the most work, but you can look at the screens and really understand what they are. And finally from there, you definitely want to document page templates. A lot of people overlook that. When I see a lot of teams trying to come in and start doing this, they'll often go and document a whole bunch of components, and then the first time, and they'll spend weeks or months kind of documenting these, and the first time a team goes to implement a new screen, they're like, okay, how do I kind of lay these out? What are the big buckets that I can put these components in? So definitely don't forget those page templates and what goes in there. But from there, what I've found oftentimes is that you have to go through and standardize. If you have a messy CSS code base or anything like that, you're really going to find a lot of inconsistencies, right? Below these form fields over here, there's kind of like 20 pixels of margin, but over here there's 25, right? It's just off enough, and that's how you start to get the jokes about the designers coming in and saying, hey, did you bump that like 1 or 2 pixels? All these inline styles that people have rejected and everything else. So here's what that looked like on a project, right? This was a whiteboard picture that I took that probably was incoherent at this point. But if you look in here, basically what we were doing, we were drawing out the page template and then really sitting down with the designers and saying, hey, what should the spacing between these sections be? 30 pixels, cool, we can roll with that. What should our percentage widths be on the different sides? How many columns should we be using? Right, so these were all just things that we had standardized that the designers not having design, or maybe they did design with some of these things in mind, right? They maybe had a grid system, but it hadn't translated into the application. And so just by looking at the code, it wasn't very useful. We actually had to have that conversation with the team. And we also went through and kind of named the different components or the different sections of the page. So again, this was like a 2-hour meeting between like the front-end development team and the 2 designers that were working on this project. And it just helped us standardize and get those consistent units, right? We're able to say, okay, our small spacing is going to be 5 pixels, our medium is going to be 15, and our large is going to be 30, right? So then you kind of start to standardize those spacing units and those atomic building blocks. From there, you can actually go through and start documenting. This can take a week, it can take a month, it kind of depends on your different situations. But this is probably the tedious part, but you can just sit down and go heads down and start working on it. Here's a perfect example of some great documentation. If you've had a chance to look at the Salesforce Lightning design system, this is the best example that I've seen in terms of documentation, right? They'll give a component a name, they'll talk about what is inside of it, or how to use it. They'll give you some different real world examples and live code. They'll give you the HTML and the CSS to implement this. And they've even gone so far as including accessibility comments and how do we make these components accessible, and they'll give you the variants. But we really say, like, when you're doing this initial pass, don't feel like you have to shoot for what Salesforce has. Just focus on a few different things to get your developers going. Focus on giving it a name, right? Make it something that people can refer to. Focus on giving it a description. Again, just explaining how it's going to be used, what's the thinking behind it. A lot of times developers or designers actually start to like this because they can go through and talk about what was the design process that led to the decisions that got made for this component. So that way, a year down the line, another designer doesn't come in and try to repeat it. A live example, right? This is the whole idea behind our pattern library, and then finally a code snippet that developers can go and copy and paste. We tend to focus our libraries on purely HTML. Again, we have a lot of situations and clients where we'll be building a just pure .NET application, and then we'll be on an Angular application. So what we try to do is just serve up just the HTML and let the developers pull that out into an Angular directive or React component or whatever front-end JavaScript they're using. But again, if you're in a situation that's very consistent, in your pattern library, go ahead and document, what is the React component to go use this, or whatever it is. So you can get creative with your code snippets. The next step, I call it kind of a 3A. If you can, it's super helpful to centralize your CSS and serve it up from one location. We'll talk about that in a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of leave that there for now. But this is a good point to start to do that as you're documenting everything. But then we really talk about kind of defining your CSS standards, right? If you're like me, most of the projects that I walk onto just have these absolutely messy, disgusting CSS code bases. And what we try to do is just kind of define where do we want this to be in the future? What's the ideal state, right? Are we going to use them? Are we going to use smacks? What's our naming convention? What's our property order, whatever it might be? And then focus on kind of refactoring the perfection over time, right? Don't feel like this needs to be one massive rewrite, because what we find is doing that massive rewrite, first of all, working it into your product backlog or getting developer time to invest in actually refactoring everything and testing it is just crazy. So kind of refactor just individual components as you go. And as we're refactoring, we try to focus on a few things, right? So if you're walking into a messy CSS code base, these are some tips that can just help. So the first thing is to start thinking in components. If you're walking into a project where people, the previous developers did not think in components, think about rewriting what's already out there, all those components that you identified earlier. Just think about rewriting them and giving developers kind of a clean slate to work from. So in this case, we just use Sass to kind of break them up into different files. When we do that, we also try to namespace the CSS. This is a great hack or workaround to clean up a messy CSS code base, because maybe we've got some messy hero images, but I can go and I can create like a consistent hero. In this case, we're using them syntax. You can create a consistent hero container, and hero logo. If those hero titles already exist somewhere in your code base, give it a different name. Just throw something else in there. But basically, make sure that as you break them up into components and namespace the CSS, that you are not going to be colliding with any of the existing stuff that's out there. Again, the idea is maybe you're keeping your messy CSS over here, but then we're kind of writing the nice, new, consistent hero or accordion or table over here with, it's well done. When you're doing that, obviously find any project as your friend. I'll put this up here, and don't feel like you have to capture it, or I'll leave it up here for a minute if you want to take a picture of it. This is a regex search that'll actually look for class equals, and then inside of quotes, it'll look for your class in that string, right? So in this case, I can replace the word table here with whatever class I'm looking for. So this comes super handy to just find that all across your HTML, because sometimes if you have a generic class, like say table, that's also an HTML element that can be incorporated in a lot of different things, so we use this a ton. And then finally, I've made this mistake a million times. Don't forget about JavaScript, right? I'll look at my CSS code and I'll be like, sweet, just kill that code, it's not used anywhere. Well, guess what? It was triggered by JavaScript, right? It didn't show up anywhere in my HTML, it didn't show up anywhere else. It was because it was in a JavaScript file. So that's kind of our refactoring process. Again, we have to get a little creative sometimes, and it's not always ideal, but it's something we try to do over time. Maybe just get a few hours each sprint, or a few points each sprint that go toward cleaning up this tech debt. And if you're focusing on just refactoring a single component, and you've taken that inventory that we talked about, where you kind of took account of what all was in there, you can say, hey, we know that this component exists on these pages. Let's go and re-implement the accordion over here with our cleaned up CSS and everything else, and then kill all the old code, right? So eventually you just kind of work your way there. So again, that's kind of the heads down, but less hard part. I would say one of the hardest portions of a pattern library, keeping it alive, is how you're going to govern it. Who's going to own it within your organization, and how are you going to make sure it stays up to date? And so here are a few things that we've learned. The first thing is we usually implement CSS code reviews. So the process that we use, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, is we actually pull all of our CSS out of the application and house it somewhere else, right? So it can be served up. So what's great is we can submit a pull request to that styles repository and just have people that are more focused on what's the big picture CSS here to make sure that people are writing good standards. Because the fact is, I don't know what environments you guys are coming from, but I work with a lot of developers who maybe don't care as much about CSS or don't invest the time in thinking about writing great CSS because they're just so slammed and focused on writing all the logic and everything else. They're like, oh, I just need to go do this bug fix. Well, they do that and it cascades out. So focusing on CSS code reviews really helps that process where if you look at a lot of pull requests, developers will be like, hey, they'll tear up each other's like React or Angular code, and then just like your CSS changes, they're like, okay, we'll roll with that. Nobody actually looks at it. And then second, the other thing, Nathan Curtis wrote a great article recently about team models for scaling a design system. And everything he talked about was exactly what we had seen in different clients and kind of worked with them to implement. He talks about kind of an ideal that everybody's shooting for, but the reality is when we look at different clients, I think there's different models that work well given the organizations that we're working with. The lowest level that he talks about is kind of like a solitary individual. So this is somebody off on their own that says, hey, let's build a design system. So they kind of extract everything out of their application, go to the rest of the company and say, hey, you can use my design system. And everybody kind of ignores it. That doesn't really apply to the app that I'm using. But again, this works great if you have kind of like a small organization and you want to start up something grassroots, right? If you're the person that wants to start up a pattern library, maybe this is where you start to prove out that it can exist in the organization. But this is immature and it doesn't really scale very well to multiple products or anything else. The second model that he talks about is a centralized design system or design team, where they're kind of the dictators or the overlords in the center that say, hey, here are all the components that you can use in your applications. So they go out and they kind of hand those off to the teams. This is the most common model that I see our clients end up implementing. They'll be like, cool, let's grab 1 or 2 developers. They're going to be our pattern library team. They're going to maintain this for the whole organization. The issue with that is that I've seen those development teams become too focused on the library itself and not enough on the implementator, on the people using it, right? So they spend all this time investing in documentation and all this code, but then it just doesn't make sense in terms of the people consuming it. So that's why Nathan argues for teams to move to kind of a federated model, where you have people spread around your organization embedded with the different product teams. Maybe they're also working with designers. And in that time, they have built-in time where they're coming together to say, here's my perspective from the applications that I'm building. Here's what I feel like we need to bring into the design system. And we have seen this work very well with clients. This is probably the model that as long as you can get time from those people to pull away from their products, bring them together and kind of have that federated team model where people are all giving that input and figuring out what's best for the entire product ecosystem and not just their own little silo that they're working in. So when we think about that and thinking about the process, I want to talk a little bit about tools now and kind of how do we go about implementing this. When we started looking at this, like I said, myself and John Gully, who's our principal in our app dev practice, we said, what's our ideal state, right? What's the process, what's the design and development process we want to use, which is kind of what we've talked about until now. And so we looked at some of the tools that are out there and saw kind of how's everything going to work. The easiest way to kind of get some documentation started is just CSS documentation. And this is using something like KSS, where you're just adding comments in your style sheet, and it's spitting out a site at the end that gives you all of that documentation. Again, this is a great first step to kind of get some visibility into your CSS code base, ideally start pushing for some better practices. But again, the issue here is this is just extra documentation. I can go in and make a change to my CSS, not update the documentation, and it's all out of sync now. The next model kind of moving forward is this idea of just building a static site that houses all my styles, right? So instead of commenting in my CSS, I'll actually go out and just build all these modules. We found this model works really well if you're a design firm that's maybe handing something off to another team, right? If the end state of your project is you handing the design off. So instead of just handing off design comps, you can also hand off that static site. Great example of this is Brad Frost's Pattern Lab. And again, this works great because the patterns are documented, you really invested a lot of time, but it's still a challenge because it's disconnected from your implementation, right? It's still extra documentation that you're having to go and build outside. Or if you're the design firm, you're handing it off, and then who knows if they're going to maintain that static site. So the third model that we looked at is kind of an integrated model where, again, we want that to be a part of our build, like that quote setter here. Source.js is a great option for this, and again, there's a million of these different tools. This one's good because it actually uses code from your application. It goes through and extracts the useful bits and kind of builds your static site documentation. But we still weren't really happy with this. And so we thought to ourselves, there has to be a better way. And in true JavaScript world, we went and we built our own framework called Pattern Pack, which I wanted to share a little bit about. So up until now, we've been talking mostly about process and documentation. Pattern Pack is a tool that we built that's open source that kind of helps us solve these problems that we've seen. And we've had a lot of success implementing this in clients and keeping those pattern libraries alive. So what is Pattern Pack? Pattern Pack does three things really well. It lets you design and build your interface using standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript if you want to. Helps you document your pattern library using simple markdown. And then finally, and this is really where it's powerful, it allows you to share the code easily between one or multiple applications, right? So we've used this as simply as, hey, our design team is prototyping in HTML and CSS over here and building the CSS styles over here. And from that same repository, our production application can pull that in, right? It can be that simple. Or we work with clients, like I mentioned, where we've spun this up for 40 applications and then they can start to implement this. So basically how it works, you take your kind of designs, whatever they might be, you document them inside a pattern pack. It'll spit out that static site for you. But then, like I said, it also lets you share that code to multiple applications. So I'm going to do, normally this is where I would insert my live coding demo, but I'm scared to death of those because they never work. So I'm going to pretend and show you guys what it's like to get started with Pattern Pack and kind of where it's powerful. And this will be pretty quick. So before we get started, there is an example pattern library out there on GitHub. The idea behind this, again, is not to provide like a Bootstrap-like styled interface. It's just a tool for documenting your interface. So the example library will give you some placeholders and everything, but Pattern Pack by itself has no opinion about what your styles look like. So here's how it starts. Basically, you would spin up a new project, do an npm init and git init, so you have like kind of a node project and a git project. And then you can go through and do an npm install, and you need two tools, grunt and pattern pack. Something we like to point out is, again, the idea is that you're extracting your styles from your main application into a separate repository. So like we've had clients that are like, we don't use Git, or we don't use grunt in our build process. That's okay, because all you need is for your pattern library to do that. So once you've done your npm install, you just set up a really simple run file. It's just a few lines of code to get the default stuff. Basically, you're setting up run.initconfig, and then you have pattern pack with just a few tasks. You don't have to pass anything in. There's a ton of other options you can pass in, but again, for the sake of demo here, we'll keep it simple. And then from there, we can do just a simple command, run pattern pack run. And at that point, it spins up kind of this blank pattern library that you can document. So once you have this up and running, you can see it's running locally, you can go and create your first pattern. The way that Pattern Pack looks at it, you can create your taxonomy of, are we going to use atoms, molecules, and organisms, or are we going to call it a style guide, and components and templates, whatever, you can set up your kind of hierarchy however you'd like. But in this case, to create a new pattern, in this case we're using Atomic Design, create two files, a markdown file, that's your documentation, and a Sass file, and we actually support less or your own CSS processor, or whatever else you want to use. And from there, you've got your Sass file, and then inside of your markdown file, you can really put anything in here. But we kind of recommend a default template where you're kind of giving that description that we talked about, you're giving your component and title, you're providing the live example, right? So you can see that in here we're creating a whole bunch of different buttons and just documenting what they might look like. And then finally, you just provide a code snippet. And this is all just using Markdown, very simple tools that even a designer could come in and set this up because we try to make it simple. They're not having to deal with this monolithic Java application with an Angular front end that the build breaks every other day. Hopefully your build's not breaking too much on here. And so from there, you have this Markdown file, and when I hit save, it basically spits out a page that looks like this. From there we've got our description, our example, and our code. So it makes it super easy to go through and document it. So you can do that over and over for your different patterns. And then really where, this is the easy part to me, setting up a pattern library, right? It's getting that static site. Where Pattern Pack really shines to me is that it allows you to unleash it and share it with other people. So you can release a new version. We recommend using semantic versioning in your design system. So again, semantic versioning being kind of like 1.0.5. And what's interesting about this is we support semantic versioning like this, but we suggest to clients to customize this to your needs, right? Normally the idea behind a versioning system like this is that a patch release is just bug fixes, you're not going to break anything. A minor release, is kind of maybe some new functionality, maybe a new component. And a major release, the idea is there may be breaking changes in here. But the specific idea behind this is that we mostly run into clients that have multiple applications. So you want one application to be able to pull in this specific version and keep it locked down, where another one, can use a brand new application can be using the latest styles. But again, customize this to your need. Some people match whatever they're using in their main branch. Some people version the pattern library independent of their app. Maybe the pattern library just has a static version. But your team has to come together to figure out what this means. So from there, you can run a few commands. You run pattern pack release, and then you just do a git push follow tags. So when John went and built kind of the initial version of this and showed this to me, and I was all like, what's going on here? So here's really what's going on behind the scenes. When you do that release, it builds your static site into a separate kind of build directory. You have your source and your build. It increments your version inside of the package.json or bower.json. It creates a brand new commit with all those new files that it generated, and then it tags that commit with a specific version. Right, so kind of, if anybody's ever created an NPM package or anything like that, you'll kind of understand this process that really all NPM is doing is pointing at specific commits whenever I say, hey, go grab this version of this package. So we kind of automate that release process where there's different commands that allow you to bump kind of the major, minor, and patch versions, and you can kind of handle that independently. And again, the idea behind automating this is, a lot of people could go do this automatically, but because we're going to have different teams and different people touching this pattern library, we wanted to standardize that process and make sure that somebody goes through this whole thing. And there's the added benefit that at the end, because we don't push, you can do a quick local code review in your Git repo. Basically say, did all the changes I mean to make end up in my release? And then kind of do a quick review before you push so that you can roll back any changes. Sometimes some unintended changes got in there. So from there, it's super easy to integrate the pattern library into your application. Today we support NPM and Bower. Again, they're very similar, so it's very easy to integrate those. But the idea is that you can go into your application and say npm install my awesome pattern library. But if you're anything like most of our clients, you're probably not going to be publishing a public npm package for your project. If you are, more power to you. I love seeing those. I keep in my GitHub repo some documentation of just public pattern libraries. I love seeing those. But a lot of people may or may not know that you can actually do npm install and point at a specific Git repo. So in this case, you could just say npm install and point at an HTTP or Git link or whatever it is to a pattern library. Inside of the package.json, if you're doing this, you can see that what ends up happening is you get kind of your dependencies, and it points at the Git repo, and then puts so you get a username and password. So this is kind of a workaround that we found. If anybody has a great workaround for basically the problem of getting access to a private Git repo, I'd love to hear it, but we've worked with kind of private NPM modules, but kind of the workaround that we find is we create a read-only user for our pattern library to the Git repo, and just embed those credentials in here so that everybody that clones the project, new people that come on, can just automatically get that, right? Versus having to be granted access to the Git repo or granted access to the private NPM package. So you can embed a username and password. Yeah, I know everybody cringes, but that's kind of a workaround we found. You pass in a path to the Git repository, and then you can point at a specific version commit. So this might be a tag. You can actually put a branch here. You can put a commit hash, whatever it is that you're trying to test. And from there, you basically end up, if this is an example application, it just pulls into my node modules folder, and you can see that we end up with this dist folder, and then inside of there we kind of got our patterns.css. And so then it's super easy to either point specifically to my node modules folder, or basically change that during my build process. So that's Pattern Pack. Again, we created that. It's at patternpack.org. We've got a whole bunch of documentation out there. This has been out for we've had it open source for about 2 months now, but we've been using it for about a year with clients and kind of refining it before we publicized it. It does some other really cool stuff, again, that I'm not necessarily going into. One of the coolest features that I like is the idea to test your CSS, right? So when we built the very first alpha version of this, we rolled it out on a project. Within 5 minutes, the team was like, this stinks, because to make any CSS updates, I now have to release a version of my pattern library, go update the version in the main app, basically just to test changes, it was a pain. So you can actually set it up where it points to a local folder on your computer, and as you make changes in the pattern library, it automatically copies into the other project and refreshes. It's pretty cool. Again, a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, but it does a lot of stuff. It's worked really well, and we've seen teams, even when one of the people that are kind of experts in our company on this, when they leave, we keep this going by integrating it into the workflow and kind of solving those problems from earlier. So just as a quick recap, again, we're trying to rethink the design process here and how does it integrate, right? We've kind of gone to this point where we do discovery and design, and then Pattern Pack kind of ends up being that develop and test process on the bottom. But really, to fight zombie interfaces, to fight zombie pattern libraries, there's 3 principles that we end up adhering to. We focus on modularizing our components. We focus on documenting them. The important step, or that holy grail, is to share them. And Pattern Packs can enable you to kind of do all those things. But again, hopefully, even if you're not using Pattern Pack, I've even talked to people here at the conference who are kind of doing that same process, where they're integrating things into a node module and kind of sharing that, or integrating into a Git repo that gets shared. So that's what I have for today. Thank you guys for coming out. It's 12:46, so hopefully you guys can make it to lunch. Again, if you enjoyed that, definitely just text zombie and 5 points to that phone number. I've got the slides up and a link to Pattern Pack right here, so if anybody wants to check it out. And since we're going to lunch now, if any of you guys want to talk pattern libraries at lunch, let me know. I mean, this is all informed by what we've learned up until now, but I haven't seen every situation, and I've learned things since I've been here. So I'd love to talk more about pattern libraries and style guides. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming out.